I have no idea. Either. Okay, I'll go on the side. I just like to see both of you guys.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this conversation about competition, women, and camaraderie on the opening night of Dance Nation. So Dance Nation, it's a preteen dance troupe where they navigate ambition, friendship, and desire as they claw their way to the nationals in Tampa Bay. So the journey is anything but easy. As Abby Miller of TV's Dance Moms warns, do it right, because somebody, sometimes your best friend, is waiting for you to screw up so she can take your place. So we have Kayla Willing, Miss Maryland, sophomore in college right now, and we have Dr. Chandni Shah, counseling psychologist at UMD. So I wanted to bring both of them in here to bring in different perspectives other than what you want to see in the dance world, like after this conversation. But Kayla, of course, has been involved in the Miss Maryland contest, and she's one of the youngest contenders to win the Miss Maryland contest. And Chandni Shah was part of the first group that started the competition called Entourage, which is traditional folk dance Garba competition that started at, so she was at UMD. She also went to undergrad at UMD, and they started this competitive team, and now it happens nationally. And similarly, there's also the Bhangra dance competition. So it's their own microcosm of dance competition, but it happens in the South Asian diaspora at most colleges today in America. And also, incidentally, Chandni learned Indian classical dance from my sister and I, so we go a long way in our dance journeys together. So typically these behind-the-scenes conversations, as most of you know, is to give you an extended kind of view into why we picked a play and what are the main themes that are emerging out of these plays. And for obvious reasons, this is about, in this case, it's 13-year-olds, but all these 13-year-olds do grow up to become women in the world, and there's competition, there's camaraderie, and and it's really interesting when you look up any of the research. It says, apparently in the real world, women are less competitive than men. And the Harvard Business Review has, even in workplaces, I mean, even to date, women make lesser money than men. So obviously they're not competing for that dollar sign. So where are they competing, right? But on the flip side, if you see college acceptances, especially in the last 3 years, there are more girls who got accepted into colleges than ever before. This year's Wharton's Business School graduate program had the most number of women ever who have been accepted into the program. So it's this weird, dichotomy. Women are very ambitious, competitive, and high achievers, but society has kind of made it awkward to be competitive as a woman. Oh, she's bossy. Oh, she's this. Oh, she's that. But then where does all this come from? Is it inbreeding within the women having these conversations? I highly doubt that, men, of course, in the workplace would be like, oh yeah, she's, I don't want to take, orders from her or something like that. But when you're 13, having a 13-year-old myself, I can tell you, I've been watching this microcosm of things, slice here, growing up in America with technology. Girls are vicious. Just last week, my 13-year-old's friends, 8 of them, over a group text, decided my 13-year-old wasn't cool enough, or she was very dramatic. And some girls even used the word toxic. At 13, I don't think I knew what that word meant. But, and they said, deep down, you're a good person, but I think we need a break from you. I mean, this is the world that's brewing. And not to say when I was 13, life wasn't any less vicious. But I feel like technology has like kind of advanced all of that. But before I continue my 13-year-old story, let's ask Kayla, how was your experience in the pageants? Because we hear all these horror stories about pageants all the time, but how was your experience?
So I competed in Miss Maryland twice, once last year and then my final time this year. And when I first competed in Miss Maryland, I was 18 years old. And so competing with women who were, say, 25 years old with their master's degree, for me, the comparison wasn't that bad because I looked at that more of what I could be. It wasn't this side-by-side comparison of what I'm not because I knew I wasn't there yet. However, since I had that thing to aim for, this year when I came in, I knew exactly what I was aiming for. And the comparison was a little bit different. Suddenly, these weren't the girls I was just looking up to, these were the girls who I was neck and neck with. And for me, I'm more of a private person when it comes to competing. If I find myself getting overwhelmed, I'm very quick to hide in a corner. And so whenever there was any cattiness, I wasn't normally around it. However, you do find that to be so. You do find when you're in such a high stress environment, when you're really comparing yourself to other women and everything's kind of being nitpicked as who you are as a person, what exactly can you bring to the table, it can be difficult. And for me, still only being 19, I was still competing against 25-year-olds, and that was hard. That was a hard comparison to face, and I think part of why I found so much success in it is that I accepted who I was. I accepted that, okay, I am 19, but this is what I can still bring to the table despite being only 19. This is why I can utilize being this young. And so it kind of helped being on my own path, staying true to who I was, but definitely there is the people who come in and say, oh, well, you know, I think you'll do great. This will be a great opportunity for you. And it's like, I know what you mean by that. I know you don't think I'll make it very far. And it was actually funny, this last time I competed, where I did kind of stay to myself. I would see everybody kind of, there's some stuff brewing over there in that corner. I'd keep to this corner over here. And I remember as the week went on and as people saw that I would win a preliminary award and then I'd win another preliminary award, they'd start to notice me. And then I was like, that's right. This is certainly a great opportunity for me, isn't it? But overall, I really appreciate the Miss America organization because of course, there is the cattiness that comes from, say, insecure individuals, but what the Miss America organization brings to the table are women who, generally speaking, are confident in where they want to go. And I feel like that brings to the table women who are much more driven and far beyond, I'd say the cattiness. So overall, I had a really positive experience with it, but of course, there are those little stories here and there.
Thank you so much, Kayla. So Chandni, how was your experience starting Entourage? Because that was its own, microcosm of like South Asian diaspora, again, highly motivated individuals. So can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, that should work, not the light.
Hello, okay, here we go. Yeah, so when I was in undergrad, I was on this team called Entourage, and we did a folk tale called Camaraderie, which is very popular from the state of Gujarat in India. And actually, even before that, I had grown up doing this style both on the streets, during festivals, but also in competitions. Many of the aunties around, my mom included, would choreograph, and there'd be like 16 of us girls, sometimes one boy. Sometimes the girls would dress up as boys. And so we would compete, even from a young age, locally, nationally, and so then in college, this is sort of like a parallel version of that. And I was able to do it 1 year in college, and it was, I think what feels a little bit different is that we did this as a group to win titles as a group. And so that feels a little bit different. And so just to give you all some context, there was 16 of us dancers. And so traditionally there was 8 boys and 8 girls, men and women. And so the dynamic was a little bit different, and I'll give you some context about me, and I really resonate with what you were talking about. I actually really struggled socially when I was much younger. And so interpersonal dynamics for me were hard. As you're talking about your child, I've gone through my own version of that when I was much younger. And so by the time I got to college and mid-space, I didn't feel confident and I didn't feel popular. I wasn't engaging in a lot of like stereotypical college activities. You know, we think about parties and things that kind of happen outside of the space of the actual dance practices and the performances. And so I think that does make a difference in terms of how the relationships go and how they build. So I also saw some of what we might call drama, but also felt kind of outside of it. And I found myself, you know, and I was much more of a tomboy back then, and I often felt more connected with the other men rather than the other women. With that in mind, I think when I think about the bonds that were created, those that went really well and supportive, and I see some of the individuals even today have a really strong connection, it felt like a very intentional move on their part. So almost like if we want to avoid the drama or the cattiness, it seemed like we have to be really intentional to think about how the relationships are formed and how the bonding is happening and how we're managing our own and each other's insecurities. And I love that you brought that up because that really reminds me of when does that sort of behavior come up? And a lot of time it is when we're feeling not good about ourselves and we're feeling uncomfortable and we're feeling emotionally at threat, which I sort of think about from the psychological lens too. And so if we can think about how to support that, and so when I think about my experience in Entourage, I had experiences on both sides of that. Folks that I found myself also wanting to distance from, like, this feels like a lot, I don't know how to deal with this. I have my own stuff coming up now, you know, and other folks that felt like, oh, these folks feel more supportive, you know, including the women as well. You know, and I saw what we might think of as cattiness across genders too. So that was my take.
Well,
That's interesting because the next question I was going to ask was, so what is it, or do you think always that in high pressure environments, like women tend to get far more competitive rather than supportive? And do you think it is like a gender behavior, or is it now that you mentioned there was cattiness on the other side? I'm sure there's competitiveness even in like the men's, you know, all the group competitions, but is it something that we're wired differently?
I think it shows up differently from the way that we're socialized, and then we are socialized to also talk about it differently, right? We give this negative connotation to the cattiness versus when, and we're thinking about the binary here, when men are more aggressive, it's seen as like a strong leadership skill, right? That whole vibe that they have is very different. And so for example, there were some dance moves we would have that the men, like we would pair up in partners with the men and women. And so I had my male partner. And so there was one thing that we would do where the men would kind of run up and then jump over us while we're standing. And so it's sort of like stunt/dance move. And I was the tallest woman there, surprise. And so all the men one day decided to come, and it was like a competition that they'd all come and try and see who all could get over me. And you can kind of tell, right? And that's like a version of competition, right? But we can laugh about that, and it's considered like fun, it's considered cool, right? And it's still a marker versus when you think about women and like the more feminine traits, you know, those are considered more of a negative connotation. I also think about when we're talking about gender, I can't help but think about patriarchy. And so if I think about any sort of power dynamic in a system, usually the folks in power really benefit when the other folks are sort of fighting among themselves and not able to move up. And when they're fighting for very few slots, whether it's a position at the workplace, whether in the dance world, it's even like social capital, right? Like who's the most popular, who dances the best, who's gonna be the lead in the front, in the center. You know, when you're fighting for those few spots, who really benefits? It's the people that tend to be in power. And so it's almost like this dynamic that happens, I think, in the way that patriarchy works and like the socialization around that. So those are sort of my 2 cents.
Yeah, and you talked about like this kind of idea of male hierarchy. I looked at it from a global perspective, we're in America right now, and I feel like we're blessed to have marriage be between two people on the basis of love, but in other places that's not necessarily so. Men kind of have this role that they can take as many wives as they want, and then from that I can see being that women are people who I think could really search for that love and attention, and being in an institution like that kind of causes, I could see a lot of tension between women, fighting for the attention of who's supposed to be their husband, who's supposed to be taking care of them, but yet it's this kind of social hierarchy. So I understood kind of what you were saying there, is that it seems that it could be like an institutional problem, that the reason women are labeled as catty is because maybe we weren't given the proper tools or ways to express competition, because we've only been put in these modes that we have to compete against each other, or we have to compete for something that's quite uncomfortable or awkward.
Actually,
That brings me to another thought and thing. So is a lot of the competition that happens within female groups, whether it be the dance thing, even in the play, it's the teacher is teacher Pat, who is a male teacher, but then all the girls are vying for this attention. So does it also become that competition gets sort of gendered and changed when it's the male gaze versus within themselves? Have you noticed anything like that, or seen any research being done on that?
That's a good question. I would say, and I love that you brought the global perspective in, because I think we're all impacted by that regardless of like individually who my people are. So, for example, when I think about my year in Entourage, we had a man captain and a woman captain. And when we think about power dynamics still and how people view who's making decisions, oftentimes still we're seeing that influence there. And so I think we're still sort of engaging in a world where the male gaze is constant, whether or not it's in our small bubble. And so I think we're always navigating that regardless.
is there
Is there a Mr. Maryland contest at all?
It's a bodybuilding competition.
Well, I guess even that's a sense of objectification, so I'll take that. So then, what is it that we can do as individuals, as people in competitive environments, be it in a competition setting or not, or like in a workplace, or even colleges for that matter, like, the sororities, fraternities, all that is a sort of competition, right? Don't you like audition, or I don't know what the word is, try out, I don't know, for sororities and fraternities. So like, what is it that you do to kind of take yourself above this like cattiness label, or like whatever? How do you think like we can start to perpetuate a different sort of connotation to this?
I think it starts with the individual, and it starts with a conscious effort to make change. And I think that starts with, I'm a college athlete, and I see this competitive world very often. And, it's hard because I see these women who are clearly better than me, who have gotten far more awards than me, and I'm just not there. And of course, I can't help but get jealous. I can't help but say, I wish I was there. But instead of kind of taking that and being jealous or being upset over their accomplishment, we have to make the conscious effort of saying, that's amazing that they're able to do that. Empower them forward. And in this world of pageantry, as I compete for Miss America in December, I'm going to be surrounded by women also who are very accomplished, who are making a difference in the world, but I can't let that blind me as far as like, oh, look at what they're doing and I'm not. I have to keep it at, look at what they're doing. Look at how they're making a difference. And that's amazing. So I think it's really celebrating differences, because we are all unique. There's not two people on this earth who are going to have every similarity line up. And so instead of, looking at the difference and thinking of it as negative, taking it as a positive, because that's just that much more that we can make a difference in the world. It's the fact that we're different that we can make a difference.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kayla. Chanvi.
Yeah, that's keep it.
forgetting to turn it on and off. Sorry. You would think with this much technology we use now in like virtual spaces that I would be used to it, but apparently not. Can you repeat the question?
No, so what is it that you think like we can start doing to step away from labeling ourselves? You know, I mean, when I say ourselves, I mean like as women and being, and also you having this space and this, you know, position where you can actually talk to other youngsters. Like, what are the things you tell them when you see these patterns sort of evolving? Like, do you get students who come up to you and have these discussions? I mean, I know it's all confidential, but you can share maybe something.
Yeah, and I'll build on the conversation we're having, because I hear it all the time when I'm doing group therapy, individual therapy, and even when I'm training, I think about my colleagues. And I love the answer you talked about in terms of working on yourself first. And when I think about the insecurities that come up within us when we see something that looks really good, but it's not ours. And I think about like toddlers and children. Oh, I want that toy. I want that person. I want that hug. I want to feel special. And that part of us doesn't really go away. So I also want to normalize and say it's really normal to see someone's achievement and think, oh, I wish that was me. Right? If that wasn't there, then we might not have as much motivation to push. So I think I love the way that we're talking about let's hold both. Let's hold both the fact that I wish that was me. It's kind of, you know, I'm kind of bummed that that's not. And how do I celebrate that other person as well? And how do I get excited for them as well? And so when I think about even my experience in graduate school, my experience in dance spaces, there's been times I really wasn't good at that and I didn't know how to do that and I didn't know how to talk about it. And so even if I could kind of step away from the conversations like we're talking about, now I can think a little bit more about how do I approach people and engage with them and have the conversations to be supportive and to say, oh, maybe we can look at each other's cover letters if we're applying for the same job, right? That's a new idea. And, oh, okay, we're not going to do that. Let's at least talk about what the process is going to be. Let's talk about what we're each going through in terms of how this space is going in the dance world also. I think about times that I was meant to perform with somebody else and it didn't work out. And I didn't know that I thought about what that other person must be experiencing watching me dance. Or on the flip side, you know, I thought about, oh, watching somebody else, I really wish that could have been me, and that helped me have empathy for that person. So I kind of wish I could have had more conversation back then with that person to say, hey, this must be hard, right, on both sides. And so I think there's ways to sort of develop that relationship, but it does take so much conscious effort to kind of introspect as well as build those relationships really intentionally with other people.
So what would you say to your 13-year-old self?
The first thing I would say is don't pluck your eyebrows. That was a bad decision. But as far as me when I was 13, I was somebody who, you'll hear this term thrown around now, like imposter syndrome. And I feel like that's something that I've kind of carried with me throughout life. Whenever I'd be put in an uncomfortable situation, you know, you cling to who looks like they're doing it the best. And then even when I started my pageantry journey, when I first started competing in Miss Maryland, that's what I was doing. I was looking at who looks like they have it together, who looks like they're doing it. And of course that might be a good way to start, but it's poor when you make your identity that other person. When the identity is no longer who you are as a person, what makes you you, it's somebody else. You know, you're making yourself someone you're not. And so for me to my 13-year-old self, I'd say it's okay to be who you are. It's okay that you're awkward now, you know, we'll work through that, but stop trying to be people you're not, because those people might not always lead you to the best place or the best destination, because the best destination you can find is who you truly are, because that's where you'll find the most peace and most confidence in yourself.
I agree. What about you, Johnny? What would you tell your 13-year-old? I have seen you at 13, so that'll be interesting for me to hear.
She has seen the awkwardness. And I'm laughing at the eyebrow thing. I was like, oh, what is my thing? I wish I would have kept all of my sneakers from back then, actually. They're all back in style now.
And she did have a large collection of sneakers, which actually wasn't super cool in the Indian kids at that time, so she had the biggest collection, and everyone would like kind of peer over and like, what are you wearing? Like, sort of like, yeah, it's cool, but I don't want to tell you it's fully cool.
Well, I think that relates to what I would tell my 13-year-old self. I also felt very awkward, very out of my skin. I felt really not much confidence at all at that age. And so I think I wish I could have told myself that you will heal in your own way and you will be more confident just being you, and that you don't need to also pretend to be someone else, and all the quirks about you are what make you you. And that's okay to be confident about.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, at 13, I was awkward or whatever, but I don't know, I had this innate sense of like confidence that I thought everyone else was wrong. I'm like, too bad for them. And I look at my daughters now and I'm just like, why? How didn't you get anything of me? Why didn't you get more of your dad? Like, you know, he still has far more social anxiety and stuff. And I look at my daughters, and if I try to tell them self-love first, they'll look at me like my mom and whatever, like, you know. But yeah, no, it's I think it's different to be 13 and then actually to raise a 13-year-old. And I think that's sort of in the play too, they bring up these themes of, you know, the 13-year-olds, and then there's the teacher figure, and then the different moms and each style of parenting. Some parents live through their children's dreams. Some parents have these high expectations of their children, and some, like me, get yelled at because I'm not pushy enough. So, you know, there's all styles, and I think that's brought about really beautifully in the play. And it's, even though it's just like a one sentence or one dialogue, the mom comes and says something, you kind of get a snapshot of how that might be for that child. And I feel a lot of these things, themes about insecurity and, you know, confidence and who you are, a lot of it does, of course, the larger structures, patriarchy, male gaze, all that is there, but there's also the small struggle, this thing of being a part of a family group or not, right? And all those things make a difference to who you tend to be. Do any of you have any questions or thoughts that you want to share? Yes. Let me bring the mic over. So.
Well,
Because it's being recorded.
yeah, I remember my wife saying to me that she was happy we never had girls. She wouldn't know what to do if she had girls. So her problem was solved because we had two boys.
But I'm sure the boys had their own set of drama that came with it.
Yeah, but she could handle that. The other thing is, I think women give themselves a problem.
Oh, why?
Oh, Al?
I'm keeping an open mind.
Because it started with all these concerns about makeup and hair and all kinds of things. And they start off by thinking they have to do something other than be natural. They're not, you know, the way they are for some reason is not good enough.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Well, on the flip side, I can tell you, I'm sure young boys they might not be makeup, but it might be, you know, the facial hair or not hair, or, you know, that adolescence, and, you know, it's different things they go through. But I think in some ways, girls might express it differently than boys do, or not. I mean, I have my friend's son who will come and tell his mom everything, and he expresses how he feels, and she's like, wow, my son really shares a lot of his emotions, which he encourages him. But I think also in some ways society has sort of closed that down, right? Like the boys don't cry thing. And recently I forgot, Federer and Nadal were crying, and there was this whole conversation after the game. There were people talking about how empowering it was to see two, you know, yes.
No, go ahead.
Okay, yeah.
Because I have a question.
Yes. So yeah, because I mean, for these two important men who are such social figures, not just sports figures, to be crying openly and in competition. They've actually played this game. They're emotional and showing their emotion, and I think that was so liberating to see that in some ways. Yes, Jason.
So can we talk a little bit about Naomi Osaka? And or would you guys like to talk about Naomi Osaka? Naomi Osaka, world number 2 tennis player, 2020, said she wasn't going to do press conferences anymore following matches because to take care of her mental health, savaged by Roger Federer and others, right? For that and for so what I want to know, and there's a little bit of a spoiler alert, one of my favorite lines in the play. One character says to another, you have crowns, not friends. Enjoy your crowns. It seems with the play, I think one of the things the play is asking is, for women, why is mental health, why does a woman have to sacrifice her mental health to be the best, to be number one, to work in competition? Whereas Rafa and Roger can cry and have a lovely emotional moment and still be regarded as champions. Any thoughts?
And Naomi can't.
Yeah,
And
why don't you go first? I have plenty on that.
I want to add to, as we're talking about her, we also want to think about her other identities, right? As a woman, she's also a woman of color, and I think that also plays into what our society sort of allows is okay and is not okay, and what it means to even be on the center stage and be open for attacks all the time. That's a big concern around mental health. And so how do we navigate it? And she essentially set a boundary and said, I'm not doing this anymore to protect my mental health. And you're right? Look at the backlash and look at the way people have responded to that. So it's just interesting to see that essentially whenever we think about pushback to try to change some of these things, and change the judgment that comes, it's sort of a good sign, because I think that means something cool is happening, but then this is sort of the growing pains that we have to go through as a society to get there.
Did you want to say something? No. So
And that was the whole thing with the Naomi Osaka thing, was that, oh, that's not proper tennis, that's not great sportsmanship. Like, who decided what was sportsmanship, that it meant that she had to feed into this whole capital structure of being at these interviews, only then she was a sports person? I mean, it's just very sad in some ways, like you said, that something has to happen for it to change, but it is at Naomi's expense at this time in history, but hopefully that has changed so much, because even, what's her name, the gymnast. Yeah, Simone, yeah, and I think that kind of emboldened her to then also step out and say things that she didn't want to be a part of. And I think slowly this conversation, society-wise, I mean, forget even gender and success about things, just mental health itself is only being discussed now, post-pandemic, when everybody had so much time to realize there's so many people hurting. In fact, there is a shortage of Adderall in the world. I mean, to think really, did we need 2 years of a pandemic for people to realize that? No, it was just that finally people are stepping out and saying, I am not okay, I can't take this pressure, I can't do this. And yes, it has to be a far more societal change, but this whole thing about competition versus crowns versus friends or trophies versus friends, I think in the narrative of womanhood, that's far more. The way I feel like there's the old boys club where I'm sure they're all competitive and checking their network out, but they'll do it subtly. They're not flaunting it in front of each other. And I think the way the competition works in those groups are far more. I mean, to date, America has not had a female president. So, I mean, we're not ready for that. And that just shows to say we are okay with women in power in different places, but we're not ready for them to be leading us, right? And so that speaks a lot about the overall patriarchal structure.
yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, it's okay. We'll keep going.
Yes. I can bring the mic over. Jason.
Is that okay? I want to ask Miss Maryland, when you were talking about competition, it was all about achievement And what about beauty and what happens with people, as I say, teenagers wanting to be beautiful? And what kind of competition goes on related to that topic?
I think that's a really difficult thing to navigate. We live in a society where pretty privilege is a real thing, and unfortunately, that is our society. My roommate, I might cry talking about it. My roommate last year looked at me one day after we had spent a long time going to different things together, like we were hanging out with friends in the student center and whatnot, and she looked at me and she said, "Kayla, they listen to you. They see you. They don't see me." And that's when I kind of realized that it's not something that I have a solution for. And I wish there was a solution. But that's a problem that our society faces. That there's so much pressure put on, not even pressure, but suddenly because a woman is considered more beautiful, or because she has more to offer to the eye, she's considered more respectable. She's considered someone to value higher. And to your point earlier about wearing makeup and things, I don't think that's necessarily the problem the woman makes. I think it's a problem society put on the woman. You know, it's something that is very real, because obviously I want to look my best because I've utilized, say, the Miss Maryland competition. It's not considered a beauty pageant anymore, but at one point you look at that competition and women are taking what they have to offer to the eye, and they're capitalizing on that, and they're making the best of it. And I think that's a noble thing. I think beauty is something to be celebrated. But it's a difficult thing to navigate. You know, sometimes I feel guilty for getting where I'm at because I'm considered beautiful. You know, when people think of Miss Maryland or the Miss America organization, the thing they think of is a beauty pageant. When it's now considered a scholarship competition, you know, it is more based on what you have to offer and your accomplishments and achievements and how well spoken you are and things of that nature. But it makes me sad. And that's about all I can comment on, is that it just is a problem that I wish I could solve.
And truth be told, I don't think you need to go to a pageant for that. I think today, between social media and earlier it used to be magazines that kind of portrayed and perpetuated a certain image or figure or shape or whatever, and now social media is constantly bombarding our children, and that's what they see, that's what they think. And you were talking about makeup, they get the machinery of advertisement is so intense. They get constant bombardment of hair. There's a hair straightener, hair this, hair that, hair that. Like, it's constant. That, I mean, even when they become a certain age and they're going to wear makeup, right? Even before that, it starts with your cereal. Like, what is the coolest cereal, right? Because that becomes the cool thing to do. And it is the following the crowd, following the thing and wanting to be something. Like, again, my daughter came and told me, "Oh, I feel very awkward. I don't look like the others." When she was 5, she went to school, she came back and she said, "When I grow up, can I be like that other kid?" I was like, "Why? Like, what? I mean, she's your age. What do you mean?" And then it occurred to me she meant she wanted to have long blonde hair because her friend was blonde. And I was like, "Oh, sorry, that didn't happen ever, unfortunately for you, but we'll find you other ways to be cool."
And I think coming back to that conversation we were having earlier about what you would tell your 13-year-old self, 13-year-olds now are bombarded with so many different things. I mean, I know I'm not that much older than 13 now, but I can even see the girls that I've been mentoring, their struggles are so different than mine, even in the short span of 6 years. I mean, for one girl in particular, the things that she struggles with and the things that she comes to me with are things that I wasn't even picturing. You know, she came to me one day and she said, "Kayla, at what age should I start having sex?" And I asked her, I said, why are you asking me this question? And she said, "Well, all of my friends are, and I can't help but think boys don't want me because I'm not pretty enough." And it blows my mind, because where did this problem come from in the fact that I didn't have to experience that, and that was only 6 years ago. And I talked to my peers about it, and I said, "Is this something that you really experienced?" And they said, "Not to that extreme." And I wonder how much of it has to do with the social pressure of social media. And I do believe, in a sense, social media puts on a face of, for one, it has to be, you have to be beautiful. Even if it's, you know, there's all this self-love, like no makeup, whatever. Well, a lot of those women posting pictures with no makeup are still pretty beautiful. But just putting that out there. But also, I think there is a lot of pressure on relationships in today's society, and a lot of women put their worth in that, and that's something that is really uncomfortable for me, looking at a 13-year-old thinking that she has to put her worth in that. That's again another sad problem that I think there needs to be a solution for.
Yeah, and actually, my friend, she's raising 2 sons who are about the same age as my daughters, and she was saying it's all these issues that we're dealing with as adolescents with the girls, it's not far behind with the boys. Like this boy, her son came to her and said, I want to ask this girl out, but I don't know how to because she's so cool and she's always on Instagram. And so then she's like, okay, you know, her husband helped him. So he asked her out, they go out, and he's like, she's upset with me because I'm not liking her Instagram posts. I don't even go on Instagram. Like, so it's this, it's sort of like this conundrum in society right now. It's like, how much, I'm not on Instagram enough, so that's why I'm not cool enough. But now she doesn't like me anymore because I'm not liking her posts. But she's seeing value of herself through those posts. So it's sort of this like very convoluted, concentric like problems, right?
Yeah, that's how everything's validated. The research also supports this. So even, for example, in the work world, people that are perceived as more attractive in a traditional hierarchy are given more jobs, are given more raises and promotions, are seen as more credible, and that they have things worth saying. So it's really fascinating to think about that as we're talking about things like beauty. I remember being that kid, you know, brown girl, and there weren't that many at that time, and I wanted to have lighter skin, I wanted to have lighter hair, I wanted to have straight hair. And I wanted to have peanut butter jelly sandwiches for lunch. Even though not everybody wants everything else. But I remember that and what that was like. And when I think about this idea of beauty and like, I'm just gonna say growing up, like I was like, oh my God, makeup is like dirt. I used to hate it. I only wear it in the dance spaces. And now I have to say, now I wear makeup pretty routinely. And you know how many times if I don't wear makeup, I've been asked, are you tired? How many women have been asked, are you tired if you don't put on a little bit of makeup? So this is a real phenomenon, right? And so again, I'm not saying people should or shouldn't. My hope is that we can sort of go and like let people choose what to do, but it just makes me think about this question of like, where does beauty fall? Who gets to make the rules? So everybody, after this is done and before you go into the next part, I would say open up Google and Google attractive woman, attractive man, and see what images come up, see what their hair looks like, see what their skin tone looks like, see what race they are, see how tall they are, what their body shape is, what their facial features are like. And that's a pretty good depiction of sort of how our society hierarchies tend to be. I think things are changing, but hopefully we can keep putting that change forward.
Yeah, there's a new TV show, I mean, I don't know if it's new or what, it's on Netflix and it just popped up, it's called Do Revenge. And the first line the kid says, and that she's supposed to be this like very successful teenager who's a scholarship kid, and she says, you know you've made it when everyone else is trying to tear you down. And it's unfortunately sort of, in some cases true, but hopefully with, you know, bright young women like Kayla who are paving the new paths for the next generation, and people like Dr. Chandni Shah who are helping these young students kind of go through their issues and finding different solutions to get over it. And good luck to me on my 2 daughters. But I think, you know, at least we're having these conversations. And I think that's what's most important, to keep having these conversations out aloud. And, you know, why is it important to feel self-love? Why is it important to know who you are before you interact with the world? Why is it important not to use, you know, social media as your validator? Like, what matters most is who's around you and who cares about you. And yes, the trophies matter, and maybe sometimes the people surrounding you don't matter enough that you have to give up on that trophy. But in some cases, maybe those people around you matter more than the trophy. So, but to get to that discerning position, I think it's an evolution for all of us. But I think overall, there's so many more of these conversations happening, research happening about competition, about women in different spaces, that I have hope for my girls. And yeah, but thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm sure you're going to really enjoy Dance Nation and take the journey with these 13-year-olds and their adolescent dreams.